All right, folks, welcome to lecture 1 of E5. My name is Ian Sexton. Over here on my left is Dan Coffey. We're going to be taking you through today's lecture, and I'm going to start a little bit by talking about some of the overarching goals of the course and how they relate to storytelling more generally. So if you are just joining us, we released a short video called Lecture 0 that's available on the course website that talks a little bit about some of the tools and technology that we're using in the course, whether that's some of the web resources or the camera resources. It's available here at exploring.digital.media. And if you have any questions about the content in the lectures or any of the content on the website, do email us at staff@exploringdigital.media. All right, so what is this class about? So our sort of slug line for this is that it's a practical introductory course that gives fast-paced overview of a broad range of topics related to contemporary media. Okay, and we sort of highlight this idea of practical and introductory. We are going to talk about photography, video production, audio recording, HTML, a little bit of JavaScript, which is any of those topics could be a course in themselves. Okay, so we are going to sort of broadly reach across and look at all of these different tools and how we best might use them. Okay, so if you're coming to this class with not a lot of experience and you want to sort of think about where you want to go in digital media production, this is a great start. If you're coming with a little bit of experience in one of these areas, then you have time to sort of investigate. Maybe you have experience in photography. We can spend some time investigating video production. Okay, but so the practical component is that we're going to spend a lot of time actually making work, right? We'll take photographs, we'll produce short videos, we have a large final project for you guys to work on. And so one of the things that we do want to talk about is how those tools, right, relate to the ideas that you want to express. Okay? Because at the end of the day, a camera, when you're taking pictures, is just sort of a dumb box. It needs a very smart operator in order to help it do the things that you want, right? To express yourself more fully. All right? So all of the decisions that you make from a technical and a logistical standpoint either support or detract from the idea that you're trying to express. All right, this is going to be sort of a foundational idea across everything we discuss. Okay, that media production in itself is a series of trade-offs. Okay, choices can range from visual and compositional choices, right? Where I place the camera, what exposure I use to make my image, or they can be logistical and workflow, right? I only have a budget of $10. Okay. Well, that's going to limit the kind of camera that I can use for this assignment. All right? Just as a simple expression. So our intentions and our required deliverables, what we're hoping to achieve, right, will define the options that are available to us. All right, so at the end of the day, we should be proactive decision makers who manage visual and narrative choices to support our goals. Right? That's where we want to get to. Okay? And as I said, every decision is a trade-off, and your choices either support or detract from your intentions. All right? So at the end of the day, we need to understand what we want to say so that we can choose the right technical expression and the right logistical expression to say that in a way that matters to the people who are listening. All right. So your trade-offs generally, and I think you may have all seen this before, where you can have either speed, cost, or quality. Okay? You can have two of them, but you can't have all of them, right? Is the sort of normal maximum for this. And so if we think about this as in the sense of media production, right? If we have cost and speed, right? It doesn't cost us a lot, and it's very fast. You could maybe think of a point-and-shoot camera, right? You can get them for very cheap. They're mostly auto. They produce JPEGs, which can be instantly posted to the web, or perhaps even your phone. You take a picture, and it can go right to Instagram. Okay? It ends up not costing a lot, but it also has limited controls. Okay? The image that it makes, it's not easy to adjust the aperture or change the way it looks. It sort of takes one kind of picture all the time. All right? So, and at the same time, it also takes like very small pictures, right? They're designed to be posted to the web. So you sacrifice some quality for ease of use, speed, and cost. Okay? Whereas if we have high quality and high speed, then we sort of end up in this place where it ends up costing a lot. And I think a good analogy for this is maybe like feature filmmaking, where the budgets are millions of dollars, right? But they're able to produce an incredible amount of content in a fairly short period of time. And that's because they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people working for 30 days, right? You can make a feature-length movie and shoot it and do the production in about 30 days. But you have hundreds of people on set. That costs a lot of money, okay? And to sort of finish this, if you have low cost and high quality, right, it's going to end up taking you a long time, okay? So it could be that you have to download gigabytes and gigabytes of footage, as you will for this next assignment, okay? And that's going to take time. 3 gigabytes, right? It's not that much. So, all right. So the trade-offs are not just this sort of idea of logistical trade-offs, which is this cost versus quality versus speed, but also that every decision in making an image actually affects the visual artifacts or the oral artifacts that are present in your finished piece. Okay? So your technical choices in acquisition matter. Okay? The technical choices in processing matter to your end deliverable result. All right? And so as we go through the course, when we talk about photography, when we talk about video, when we talk about audio recording and HTML, we are going to frame it through this idea that the visual choices are made in advance. That you're thinking consciously about, I want my image to look this way versus this way. And I think a simple example is actually this image here, right? Which I think is credit to you, right, Dan? Yeah, so this is an image of a dam. You can see that the water is sort of suspended, that time has stopped, okay? It's really, really not, you can't really tell what's going on in the background. But if we look at it another way, this is a different capture, right? It's the same frame, it's the same image, but it looks completely different. The water now has this sort of streaky fluid approach. You can sort of see the background of the lake, okay? And all this is to represent that there are many different ways to capture an image. And each one of them presents us with a different look, all right? So why might you choose one over the other? And again, it's this idea of supporting your story, okay? Oop, that's not backwards, sorry. So for this image, right, maybe we are talking about time and the instance of a moment, right? It was at this moment, and so we want to freeze time. And maybe for this image, right, it's more about the quality of the environment and the space. When you sort of sit next to a babbling brook, which is this, not quite what this is, it's sort of a weird dam, but you sort of get the idea, right? Exactly, exactly. Okay, so intention in storytelling. How do we use and how do we understand the story and what we want to say so that when we are confronted with these technical choices, we can make smart visual decisions? So for this lecture, I'm going to focus on narrative cinema, in part because narrative cinema is sort of like the most freely defined, right? It's not really constrained by marketing clients or educational video or things like that. And also, our assignment for week 1 is actually going to be focused on building a scene out of narrative footage that we will provide for you, okay? So we'll use this as sort of a scaffold for that assignment, all right? But that is not to say that these concepts don't apply to other modes and genres of media production. If you're doing a photo essay, right, that essay in there is your story. If you're doing a marketing video, you have some brand that you want to sell to people, and that brand can be your story, okay? So again, even if it's not a giant sort of traditional narrative story, there is this thread of intention that should follow through all of your work. All right, so to dive right in, what's the difference between story and plot? Does anyone here have an idea? What's a story? Yes?
So the story has character, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Okay, so there's characters, and they go from the beginning to middle at the end, which is sort of suggests this time and this transformation. Okay, so the story is the telling of them moving from the beginning position to the end position. Okay, I think that's really good, right? So a story is an unfolding of events. That's a really good sort of crystallization of that. Okay, so is that different than plot? And if so, how is it different? Does anyone have a sense of why they might be different? All right, so plot is the unfolding of events, which is essentially a story, but with an understanding of why it's happening. Okay? Right? And this is sort of really succinctly put by a quote from E.M. Forrester, which is, the story is the king died and then the queen died, which is the narrative events that unfolded. The plot is that the king died and then the queen died of grief. Right? It gives motivations to her actions and or the situation. All right? So part of what we're talking about when we're talking about story is not just understanding the actions that are occurring on screen, but the larger why, right? The subtext of the whole story. All right, so plot ends up being the motivated actions of characters in a believable world. All right? And this is important because if your audience does not believe that your character would do something, no one will believe your story, right? This doesn't mean that a believable world needs to be sort of the mundane 9 to 5 that we sort of exist in. Fantastical elements or exaggerations can exist, okay? But the relationships of the characters and the ramifications in the world need to make sense, all right? That helps the audience with this willful suspension of disbelief, right? I'm willing to believe in flying cars, okay? If there is a scientist who invented them and someone has to drive them and there's some sort of relationship that exists between the characters and the objects that exist in that world, all right? Okay. So a lot of how we're talking about story revolves around this idea of characters, right? We said that there was this sort of narration of events from a beginning to a middle to an end. But one of the things that you also said was that there were characters in there, okay? So understanding your characters becomes really fundamental to motivating them correctly, all right? And so there's a sort of basic 5 questions that we can ask about any character in any given story, all right? The first one is, what does the character need? What are they trying to achieve? All right? So these are things like goals, okay? What does the character want to do? And a goal could be something as simple as like, I want to throw a dinner party. That's my goal for the day, for the evening, I should say, okay? The other question is, how does the character change throughout the story, okay? Good stories allow your characters to start in one place and end up in another, with some transformation in between, okay? Which brings us to sort of what is preventing the character from achieving their goals. If it was easy for the character to achieve a goal, there'd be no transformation. So in storytelling, we'll often put impediments in the way of our characters, right? This is the idea of conflict, okay? That there's some force in the world that's stopping the character from achieving what they want to achieve, and that they have to somehow battle around that, which is the idea of, like, that's what gives a story drama, okay? The other one is, what must the character give up to overcome this obstacle, okay? So if we're talking a little bit about how characters transform throughout their story, then at a certain point, they have to give up something or change, all right? And this sort of weight allows the character to have a bit of a dilemma, right? They have to struggle with this decision. I have to give up X because I want Y, right? Again, it's building this idea of drama, okay? And how does a character resolve their attempt to achieve their goals? So in many stories, the character wants to achieve a goal, they struggle to achieve it, they achieve it, and it's like infinite happiness, right? It's perfect. Everything's great. But in some stories, a character is striving to achieve a goal, and they finally get there, and they realize they don't really want to be here after all, right? They missed what they really wanted, okay? So your resolution doesn't necessarily have to be this sort of perfection of happiness. The character doesn't have to achieve the goal, okay? But you do need to understand and realize how that resolution applies to your character. So we talk a lot about goals, right? But goals are sort of, as I said, say, I want to have a dinner party tonight. But the stakes are a little bit different, okay? The character goals are actions that I can make, or that they can make, Okay, so I could host a dinner party, but the stakes are why. Right? Why am I hosting a dinner party? Is it because I want to have my boss over and impress them and sort of garner support for promotion? Right? Or is it because I want to cement my role as a father figure for my family? Okay? Those are two very different motivations for the same action. Okay? And this is that idea of subtext, where you can imagine that the words on the screen are something like, wow, it's going to rain. Right? Which are fairly flat. Wow, it's going to rain. Doesn't really mean much. Okay? If I am on a picnic and I say, wow, it's going to rain, right? That has a different meaning than if I'm standing in sort of a field during the middle of a drought and I'm like, wow, it's going to rain. Right? One's sort of apprehensive and dreadful, and the other is like, oh my God, this is amazing. Okay? So those stakes end up being the why behind the goal. And this is that idea of character motivation. If your character is acting or taking actions that don't sort of align with the stakes that are presented to them, right? Then it doesn't feel believable, and it sucks the audience out of that sort of willful suspension of disbelief. Okay? All right, so the most important thing you can think of about stakes, right? And I think we could talk a little bit about like what might be a good example of a stake. Like what would be a stake in a story? Yes?
The fate of the world.
The fate of the world, right? That's really huge. That's like, Armageddon or something like that. What's another stake? Maybe something smaller. Yeah?
Wanting to get your dog back.
What? Wanting to get your dog back that was stolen, which is the stakes in what, John Wick, right?
Yes.
I think so, yeah. So exactly. So one of the things that's sort of interesting is that large stakes often tend to be less effective, right? I don't have a lot of experience with what it's like to like save the world on any sort of like large action movie scale. Okay? I do have experience with what it is to sort of feel the loss of a pet. Okay? So it helps me sort of uniquely identify with that character almost immediately, right? And I can buy in and help frame, like, buy into the narrative that's building and use it as a framework to understand the story. So the key is this sort of idea of empathy, right? Characters can't exist in a vacuum, and having your audience empathize with them and identify with them makes this narrative more believable. All right? So even if there are flying cars, if I identify with the shared humanity of the characters in that story, I'm willing to sort of suspend my disbelief at this idea of flying cars. All right. So building empathy is integral to this. So we think about, as you begin to develop stories, think about relatable moments, right? Moments of vulnerability, right? Injustice, fear, loss, feeling lost and adrift, okay? Other ways that we can build empathy is sort of focusing in on that idea of our shared humanity and personal experiences that we understand as storytellers and audience members. All right. So the conflicts in the story, right? These sort of oppositions are often embodied by another character, right? I think we've all heard the idea of you have your protagonist and you have your antagonist, and they sort of stand off. They have different and competing goals, right? I want to save the world. The villain wants to end the world. That is most sort of like basic, okay? Again, overcoming that conflict needs to result in some fundamental change for your character, which can be positive, negative, and even in some cases neutral. All right, so when we think about multiple characters, we can think a little bit about building relationships, okay? And so building relationships means that like even when people are aligned or even when they're squaring off against one another, with opposite goals. Okay? So this idea of power differentials, who's in control? How do they exercise control? Right? Does that shift? You know? So it's really simple. Like maybe it's like I could take this and I could give this to Dan, right? And I'm like, here you go, bud. That's one kind of relationship, right? Give me that back. Right? And I handed it to Dan, and I'm like, no, you can't have this. Right? It's a completely different kind of relationship. And it's sometimes just as simple as that. The ideas of proximity, okay? When you're presenting two people on screen, the closer they are, the more likely they are to be aligned together, right? The further apart they are, the more there is this sort of visual separation that the audience will read as separation in their relationship. Okay?
I don't know what that says about this lecture, and I see all this space.
We're going to switch in a minute. It's sort of a shared duty, right? So who are we with, and where's the visual focus, and what does that proximity of character suggest? All right? So here's an interesting example. Shout out to Scully, who's online watching this right now. So we have a foreground character who's sort of much larger in the frame, right, than our background character. They have a little bit more visual weight. I understand that like, the focus is actually still on the background character. We could sort of shift it forward to Scully to really make this point. Okay? But right here, it's the same frame, but Scully and Dan are sort of the same size, right? It's more natural feeling and has a similarity, a sort of equality to their positioning and size and frame. We can take it one step further, and we can make Dan giant and Scully diminutive, right? Shifting the relationship, the way the audience sees the relationship of a single photograph just by adjusting the relative size and frame, okay? And so don't stress too much about how this is done, right? When we get to lensing and composition, we'll dive really deeply into it, but just be aware that you have these tools at your disposal, okay? So at the end of the day, right, good narratives and good stories are drawn by building tension, okay? There has to be some uncertainty, all right? And the stakes of the story need to be such that we're not entirely sure that our protagonist is going to achieve their goal, okay? So a character with conflicting desires, right? I have to give something up to achieve this thing that I want. This builds tension in the story, right? Something they don't want to give up. They have to trade for something that they desire, okay? Uncertainty about your character overcoming their goals. So this is sort of the idea that the stakes may be so large that they may not overcome them, right? That the conflict is so entrenched that it's difficult for them to achieve and climb over that impediment, right? Uncertainty about who to trust. And I think we've all seen films where there's sort of like a red herring where one character appears to be friends with another character and ends up betraying them at the end. And there's often, if you go back and watch those films, there's a little bit of foreshadowment that will come about, right? There's some visual hint that this character isn't quite right, whether it's something with the lighting, right? Maybe half their face is in shadow, right? To give you that sort of duplicitous look, which is so old-timey. But that there's these sort of visual cues that the filmmakers are putting in there to help guide your understanding of the story. Right? And an uncertainty about their relationship to the stakes at large. Will they find their dog again? Will they stave off Armageddon? Or what have you. So at the end of the day, when you get to this idea of resolutions, right? How does the character change? Did they achieve their goal? And if so, was it what they imagined? Right? And are they better off or worse off? All right. So before we jump into this, has anyone taken a class where you've talked about the shapes of story? We sent out a link to Kurt Vonnegut talking about the shapes of stories. Did you all watch that? Right? It was short and sort of sweet. His humor is like really dry and beautiful. But so when we talk about stories more generally, I think oftentimes you'll see this sort of drawing here. Right? Is it this way? Where you have sort of your character starting position, and they're going up through the conflict. I love the smoothing. Right? It hits its climax here, right? And it resolves here. And I think in some ways, you'll find this in a lot of books, but it sort of belies the point that this is not actually what's happening in a lot of the stories that we are exposed to. Okay? What may actually be happening is that your character makes some advancement, and then they're set back, and then they make a little bit more advancement, and then they're set back, and then they finally achieve their goal, which is totally a different picture. Okay? And I think what was interesting about the Vonnegut piece was that it allowed us to sort of think a little bit more about the structure of the story and where it's going, so that you can make informed decisions about how you're going to present any given moment. Okay? So if we draw sort of axes here, right? Where that's the E, and that's the B, and we have good fortune up here, right? And terrible fortune down there. The story of, he described it as boy meets girl, but it doesn't have to be about a boy or a girl for that matter, right? But that a person starts here at some sort of, not mediocre, a little better off than mediocre, right? And something good happens, then something terrible happens, and then something wonderful happens. Okay? So thinking about how you would approach the filmmaking here versus here is sort of an interesting question. What might it look like generally, in general terms, for this section of the story? Something good just happened, right? You walk out your door, you find $100, or you walk out your door and you meet someone wonderful, things are looking up. What does that sort of seem like visually? How might you do it, Dan?
Some glowing light,
Okay.
flattering camera angles.
Okay, so we're talking about like flattery, right? Maybe it's a little bit brighter.
Vibrant.
Yeah, vibrant.
Colorful,
Saturation.
So there's these sort of visual elements that we could pull in to sort of be the stylistic choice here. What about here? What are some thoughts on how it might look?
Muted.
Muted, okay? I mean, you could go all the way to saturated. You could end up in black and white, right? Totally, like you could go to that extreme if you wanted to. Okay, muted.
Sad soundtrack.
Okay, so now we're bringing in some audio, right? We can use audio cues to help push and pull. This is our understanding of the story. Absolutely. Yeah.
Off-kilter camera angles.
Oh, okay. So great. So we start to adjust our composition, okay, to suggest a sort of mental state. Those are all great ideas. Absolutely, right? So we were going to say, let's say muted, right? And then let's say off kilter. Okay. So now my question for you is, what about over here?
Super bright.
Yeah, so we sort of painted ourselves into a bit of a corner, right? If we've pulled out all the stops right here, where is there for us to go at the end of the story, visually? Okay? So maybe actually, like now that we've sort of begun to think about this, maybe we want to scale this back a little bit. Okay? It's not super vibrant, but it's definitely not muted like this. And then when we get to this end part, maybe it is super vibrant, right? It goes off the charts. Okay? So taking the time to do like sort of your first steps in pre-production, which is thinking about the shape of a story, right, can help you define how you're going to approach your visual choices. Okay? And so don't stress out too much about how to achieve vibrant colors or off-kilter compositions. We'll get to that when we cover the ideas of photography and video production. But begin to think about the context and the content that you've seen and how you can apply it to stories that you want to tell. All right? Beautiful. Should we do one more? Or should we watch a clip? What do we got? I think we will, let's run over and we'll watch a clip because I want to show a short opening of a film that sets up the larger narrative and then sort of tease apart some of the choices that were made there and how they might support the story that we see, but also the story that's going to be told. So the film I want to show today, the opening sequence, is from a film called Blue, which is part of the Three Colors trilogy by Krzysztof Kieslowski, excuse me. And it's the first in the trilogy of films called Blue, White, and Red, which represent the colors of the French flag and are sort of loosely evocative of the ideas behind that.
Diana. Allez, monte.
So what did you see in the beginning of this sort of film? This is setting up all of the film to come thereafter.
It seems sad. The blue tone.
Okay. Yeah, so overall, there's a incredible cast of blue to all but really one or two moments in this opening sequence, right? So they were able to adjust the color temperature of their camera to make this cool looking sort of shot rather than something maybe more neutral, which you might be looking at online right now, or something that's much more warm and golden and brighter, which so you associate this coolness with sadness, so that warmth maybe is associated with sort of positive emotions. Okay, that's a good observation. Yeah.
Because there were certain elements of danger,
Okay, some elements of danger. What do you mean by that?
like a camera angle that kind of looks at traffic moving very fast, but doesn't give a complete look, complete view of what's happening, basically.
Yeah, so it's sort of obscured, right? We're looking at everything from the underside of the car, right?
Just remind me.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Later on, in the fog that's appearing on the road.
Yeah, and the car seems to, there's fog that's appearing on the road, and the car seems to sort of be traveling fairly recklessly, right, at high speed. And we get that sense from the way the cars move in front, right, as it's sort of overtaking vehicles, and that sort of sharp horn sound. The very beginning of the film, it sort of has this rhythmic audio that is playing, right? The sound of the tires rolling over the concrete, sort of lulling us into this sort of false sense of security, and it's sort of sharply detonated with the sound of that horn. Okay? Yes?
Every shot of the real world, at least in the beginning 2/3, is a close shot, except for the like sort of imaginistic perspective of the child looking backwards, which is also the only shot that's not blue in the beginning of the section.
Yeah, so the comment is that every shot of the real world has this sort of blue look to it, okay? With the exception of the imaginistic was the word that I think you used. Look where the child is looking out through the back window at the cars and the lights sort of in that ethereal moment in the tunnel. And I think that that's really interesting too, that all of this sort of real world sadness is not falling on the child. The child has a much more sort of innocent outlook, okay? So precisely this moment of mystery and sort of wonder at the world, we're not yet burdened with maybe the sadness of adulthood, okay? I think that's a very interesting read. Okay, and then we're sort of here where this is the only time that we sort of see her, right? And it's not blue, okay? It's a sort of weird green, and she's literally just staring at us. That's all, right? Ostensibly, she's looking at sort of the cars in the background, but really we're just getting sort of a look into her eyes, okay? And you often hear people talk about like the eyes being the most relatable part in filmmaking, okay, or the window to the soul or something like that. And so there is this sort of moment where we're asked to sort of just be with this child for a minute. You know, I think it's maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Okay? So I don't want to like give away too much of the film that follows on, but I do need to sort of contextualize it a little bit. So this is the father in this family. There's a mother and a daughter, okay? In that car crash, the father and the daughter die, okay? And I hope I'm not ruining the film, but it happens literally 3 minutes in, and the whole rest of the film is about the aftermath of that, okay? So one of the things that we see is sort of the driver of this car. We never see this man's face, but part of the story that follows is the wife dealing with her relationship to this husband and the aftermath of his sort of life and experience, but we sort of never see his face. Because the story isn't about him, it just relates to him. It's about someone else's perception and memories and experience of this person, okay? It very easily could have just flipped the camera and shown us his face, but it's a conscious decision not to, you know? So, one of the most important things that we can use as a tool as storytellers is this idea of dramatic irony, okay? And this boils down to this simple question that you can ask yourself. Who knows what when? Okay? We are underneath this car and we can see the brake lines dripping brake fluid out of them, right? We are aware of this, but the characters are not, right? There's no way they would drive off in that car if they knew it was leaking brake fluid. So what does that do for us as audience members? How does that change the way we're interpreting the story that's unfolding? It makes you worry?
Yeah, because you know something bad will happen.
Right, exactly, right? So it sort of it increases this idea of tension. Like, are they going to make it to where they're going safely before this becomes a problem? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an anticipation of something that's already pretty clear
Yeah.
at that moment.
It's sort of surprising too. So this anticipation of something clear in the moment that you're saying is like, I know that something bad is going to happen because you're showing me this brake fluid, but I'm still hoping that it won't, right? It's very powerful, okay, to sort of like show us this bad thing that's about to happen, and like my gut reaction is to hope that it won't. And that's the beauty of like very craft-oriented storytelling. Yeah?
It's interesting because the first scene is of the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like foreshadowing that something's going to go wrong in that area a little bit.
Right.
And so I was like, I didn't catch it until it was over. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, so the idea that the film begins on the wheel, which is sort of down where we are in this shot, brings up this idea of foreshadowment. There's also in this background, you can see the little girl who will be sort of central to our character's sense of loss as they navigate through this traumatic incident. What's something really interesting about this 3-minute clip that I showed you? I said there were 3 characters, right? There's the little girl, who we spend a significant amount of time with in those 3 minutes. There's the father, who we see sort of for a couple seconds, but we don't actually see him. It's just the back of him. And I said that there was the mother. You only hear her voice, right? That's it. You never see her. And so this, again, is another conscious decision that he's not going to not present that character in this moment, and that the rest of the story will be about her, and we will be with her the whole way. It's sort of a creative inversion, if you will, right, of who we are with in any given moment. Okay, a couple other tidbits that are sort of interesting. There's this character at the end who's sort of waiting and hitchhiking, right? He's got a skateboard, he's got that wooden toy to get the ball on the stick. You know, and so there's this sort of concept of these missed chances. Like he's trying to hitchhike in this car that not only seconds later crashes, right? In a like terrible car crash. Okay? So you can play with these sort of moments of situational irony as well. So one of the things that sort of as a craftsperson who makes films, I do love this moment of this crash car because it's pretty obvious that they didn't crash it in that moment, right? If you sort of watch it, you'll see that it sort of falls down and the hood closes, and then someone throws paper out the window, which becomes like a little bit humorous because you can sort of see the mechanism of them creating the violence of this car crash, right? And they're like, let's make this more violent, we'll throw paper out the window, okay? And to a degree, it does make it more violent, but it also adds this weird subtext where I find it humorous because I know there's a person in there throwing paper out. Okay, but so ask yourself, does that help the narrative at this moment, or does it end up hindering it? So you increase you made a choice. I want to increase the violence of the car crash by throwing paper out of it, but now there's this interpretation where it's actually like a little bit funny and staged. Okay? And it actually reduces my connection emotionally to the moment, right? And increases my connection sort of intellectually as like a craftsperson of making movies. Okay? Which may not be the intention. So even when you're working through these stories, like sometimes you will make a decision and it may backfire a little on you. Okay? And that is okay. The point is to then sort of take time, look at the work, reflect, right? Grow and adapt. And that's one of the reasons that we're going to build in a lot of critique time as we move through this semester. Okay? So that, yeah, maybe we'll try something interesting, like increasing the violence by throwing some paper out. It worked. It sort of didn't work, right? We can talk about that overall. And the final thing is sort of this character's loss of innocence. This character shows up again later in the film, but you can see that they throw away their sort of childish toys or childhood toys, their skateboard, and that little game. I don't know what it's called. I should look that up. As they run over to this sort of scene of carnage. Okay? And this is just a really simple sort of symbolic device. I'm carrying this bright yellow skateboard, right? That is the only bright thing in this whole image, right? It's foggy, it's muted, it's all the things that we said would be when we were down in the bottom of that story. And this young man has this bright, vibrant object that he casts away in this moment. right? As he moves from sort of childhood to adulthood, maybe. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan briefly to dive into a little bit about the story choices in editing and talk a little bit about shotcut more generally and in preparation for the next assignment.
All right, welcome back everybody to round 2 of Exploring Digital Media. Thanks to Ian for the great primer on storytelling. So now we're going to dive into the business of editing. So what is editing, right? So if filmmaking is telling the story and taking it from conflict to resolution and kind of riding the story arc along the way, editing is deciding how we tell it, right? Ian talked a lot about the elements that you can use in composition and color temperature and other decisions you can make to tell the story. And as an editor, you're the one taking these media pieces and putting it into a timeline, into a sequence, and actually assembling the story. So how do we edit, right? In the olden days, it looked like this. So this is what is this, Ian, a Steamback machine?
Yeah, a flatbed editor.
Right, so I've never actually touched one of these machines myself. Ian has, but you've got reels of film that go through it. You cut it, you splice it, you physically actually like tape film together to put these shots together. So it's really hard to Command Z and undo. But fortunately, in the world of digital media, we have what are called NLEs, or nonlinear editors. And there's a whole bunch of them out there. Some of the big ones right now are Adobe Premiere. We've got Final Cut Pro, iMovie, Avid, and up here on the top left we have Shotcut, which is the editor we're going to use in this class. And the reason we're using Shotcut is because it is free. It is cross-platform, so if you're on Windows or on Mac, it's very easy to use. But you kind of get what you pay for sometimes. It's a great piece of software, but there are some pitfalls that come along with it. So one of the first things I really want to hammer home as we get started is that you need to stay organized, and that's all the way through the production process. Starting back in pre-production as you're thinking about your story and how you want to tell it. When you're actually shooting the film, you definitely want to be organized. And when you get to post-production, like as simple as how you arrange the files on your hard drive matters, because you need to know where everything is. And if you need to access a file or a piece of music, right, if you have a standard convention for how you do this, it'll make life a lot easier as you try to sift through all your footage, because as you build bigger and bigger projects, your files on your hard drive will actually enumerate many times over, and it'll be hard to find things. So stay organized, and we don't specify any specific organization in this class. You're welcome to use this example, but find whatever works for you and stick with it. All right, as I said, staying organized starts in pre-production, but even on set, right, it's really helpful to kind of use something like a slate here where you can write information about the scene that you're working on. You don't need anything as fancy as this if you don't want to. You're certainly able to use a whiteboard or a piece of paper. But if you're doing several versions of the same shot over and over again, it's really helpful to kind of know which one is which. And in the assignment that you'll get tonight, the first thing you'll see in every take is the slate that sets up for you what shot it is that we are working on in that moment. There's also a practical benefit to this. If you're actually syncing audio and video, which we'll get to later in this course, actually closing the sticks and having the audio sound mark where your sync point is will help you synchronize your audio and video. So this is a frame of Shotcut. This is our nonlinear editor that we're working on. And so there's a few pieces of it that I think are just helpful to kind of understand. I'm just curious, how many people in the room here have experience using nonlinear editors before? How many people have done editing? A few hands. And just shout it out. What are you using to edit? iMovie? Premiere? Camtasia? Premiere? OK, is anybody here planning to use Shotcut? No? OK, well, this is a question for the online students, too. Let us know if you're planning to use Shotcut, because I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through how to use this software today. But we do not require this. Certainly, if you're comfortable and you know another editing software, please use that. This is simply if you're trying to get into this. I think that where Shotcut kind of falls for me is like one step above iMovie. There's a few more complex things you can do, but definitely a step below the rest. And it is a little bit buggy. As I've been using it and getting ready for this class, it does crash on me a reasonable amount of times. And there's a few annoying things that you can't do that we'll get into as well. But the price you cannot beat. All right, so down on the bottom of the frame we're looking at is our sequence or timeline. And this is where we're going to start to take our media and assemble it so that as we play back, to think of this x-axis as time. As we move along time, right, this is what we're going to see visually. So whatever the top layer is, hierarchically, is what we're going to see. So if this clip overlaps this clip, this is the clip that we're actually going to see in our viewer when we watch. Down here, we can see audio clips that have waveforms in them, and those are just representations of loudness of the audio. And then over here, this purple and blue box is a transition, which means that there's, instead of just cutting and abutting two clips together, there's actually some kind of transition that's happening between them, be it a cut or a dissolve. We'll get into those. So I like to think of editing like this, right? You are making this beautiful piece of art. Yes?
Can you go back one slide? I have a quick question.
I'm going to go back one slide for a quick question.
The waveforms for
Yes.
the audio, like you described the top one being the one that you see for the video.
Mhm.
So for the audio, is it the same?
Great question. So how does it work when you have multiple tracks of audio? You do hear all of them, right? And so it kind of, depending on how you've got the sequence set up, it'll sum them together for you, or sometimes you can have one channel be your left channel and one channel be your right channel, or sorry, one track be your left channel, one track be your right channel. It kind of depends on how you set it up. For most of what we're going to do in this class, we're not going to worry about those details. We're going to let it sum our audio together and hear everything in both ears. But yes, so you can actually turn tracks off globally. There's a little speaker button here, and this is common in every NLE. But you can, if you decide, oh, I don't want any of this track, you can turn it off and get that sound out of there. And going back to being organized, it's kind of helpful to kind of put like your soundtrack on one track, so you can turn it off and hear just the dialogue if you've got the dialogue on one track. Or if you have two people talking, put person A's dialogue on one track and person B's dialogue on another, so you can quickly hear who's saying what, or turn off the music. Just to make it more quick to make changes. All right, so my analogy about what is editing, right? So we're making this beautiful tapestry together of visual elements and audio elements. So I like to think of the sequence as our canvas. It's what we're actually applying our paint to. The clips are our paint. And often, we talked about the difference in colors and contrast and everything. So I think it's a fit analogy. And then the transitions are our brushes. So how do we move from one shot to another, or one scene to another? We want to think about this not just in terms of what is the mechanism, like a cut or a dissolve or a wipe to move from one scene to another, but also how do we kind of progress the story and sequence our shots to move from one scene to another. All right, so transitions. On the left, we have a frame from iMovie. On the right, we have a frame from Shotcut. And so as you can see, the creators of these software have given us a multitude of options, right? We have cross dissolve, cross blur, fade to black, barn door diagonal, northwest to southeast. Tons of options, right? How many people have spent time throwing these into your project to see what they look like? So as a rule, don't use any of them, right? Just kidding. These are my rules. So I think when you tell an effective story, it's not about gimmicks, right? It's simply about moving and progressing your scene very simply. And we're going to talk about how you make an effective cut, because cutting is really the biggest transition you're going to use, I think, when you're telling stories. So just to zoom this in for you, you might be wondering, what is matrix snake parallel horizontal? I wondered that when I wondered it. So I didn't want to leave you disappointed. Here it is. So, it's gimmicky, right? Like, what does this actually do for our story? And if you go back to Star Wars and George Lucas, right, he certainly uses wipes in a creative way and effectively. But I think for the purposes of this course, as we're starting out, it's our goal to equip you with the tools for telling an effective story without having to resort to anything like this.
Yeah,
So,
we appreciate it.
all right, so as I said, the bread and butter of your editing is going to be the cut, which literally looks like this. We have, shot A that abuts to shot B, and dissolves where they overlap, and there's like a transition between them that's smooth and gradual. All right. Everybody's heard the term three-point editing in this room, maybe? Maybe not? Anybody want to throw a definition on it for me? So three-point editing is really the kind of foundation of starting to take a clip and build our story. And so literally the first step is to say, where do I want to, so in your editor, you're going to have a list of clips. You're going to pull one up, and you're going to start to watch it. And you're going to say, where do I want to start telling the story from? And you literally pick your endpoint. you say, okay, I'm going to have this clip go from here to here, and you pick your out point. That's where you're going to end the clip, and then you have to decide where does it go into the timeline, right? Am I going to put it before the shot? Am I going to put it after the shot? Do I want to have it come in halfway through where I had the previous shot? And so there's some shortcuts to do this, because this is what you will do as you start to build a story very frequently. So in Shotcut and in many other editors, Premiere included, it's the I and the O key. So as you're playing along your preview window here, you hit the I key, and it'll literally shorten your clip, the in point marker here, and then you keep playing to where you want to end the clip, and you hit O, and that's the out point, and then there's a shortcut to drop it into your timeline, which in Shotcut is the A key to append it to the end of your sequence, and the B key just to drop it in and overwrite whatever clip your marker is on. And there's this white line here is the playhead. And so wherever that is where you're going to append things to. Or wherever you're going to, we hit the B key, wherever the clip will end up. All right, so how do we organize our story visually? This is the question, right? How do we want to tell our story? Ian gave a great example of what choices you make when you start here, and then you go down to here, and then you come all the way back up. Like, what do you leave yourself? So you want to start to think about these things when you unfold your story in editing too. And the real thing you want to start to ask yourself is, why cut? This is the big question. So when do you want to make the transition from the medium shot, let's say, of somebody to the wide shot of the next person, or the close-up of the next person, or the close-up to the same person? Why would we want to change the shot? Yes?
Because based on the feelings that we want to do, if we want to get more intimate with the character or get closer to be able to say something important.
Yeah.
After establishing where they are. And
Sure.
diving into-
So you might go closer if you want to be more intimate with somebody, right? Because a close-up shot, right, we're typically talking about the face, gives you much more information about their emotions. You can read their face. You can see their eyes much bigger, right? Makes total sense. So there's a few reasons. There may be more information that you want to show, right? Maybe you want to come in and show that this person's actually upset. So it's a reason to cut and come closer. Or there's something from the scene that's not visible that you want to see. There's nothing else to gain from the current shot. That's also a reason to get away from your current shot or transition into the next scene. But every time you make an edit, you are making a decision now. Like, I feel like once you're informed of this and you start to think about putting a story together, every cut that you make or every dissolve that you make should be informed, and it should focus around telling the story that you intended to set out to tell. So we kind of talked about shot progression there when we talked about going from a wider shot to a close-up shot. So let's take a specific example for a second and talk about how we might unfold it visually. So let's take a horror scene where we have an axe murderer who's chasing somebody through a factory. How do we want to? What's the first shot that we want to show to tell the story?
Show the factory.
Show the factory, right? So this is probably like a wider shot, and it's going to give us more information about the location that we're at. Okay? Right. So maybe in the same shot we kind of introduce a character, and then we maybe meet the person who's being chased. And we're kind of getting a little bit tighter here as we work our way in. And then, we cut to the reverse. But what I'm trying to get at here is that a common pattern as we start to progress our shots, really immaterial of the scenario, is that you start kind of wide because you get a lot more information in a wide shot. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in the composition lecture. We work our way in tight to kind of build that tension and show emotion, show the state of our character, our antagonist, and then we kind of work our way back out. Or we transition, we kind of ignore this part and transition right to the next scene. But this is kind of a typical pattern of building that tension. And so Alfred Hitchcock here has a great rule about this. Does anybody know what the Hitchcock Rule is? And I'll just say every rule is meant to be broken, right? These are kind of conventions as you get started that are helpful to get you to meet expectations of your audience, but there's certainly times to break all of the rules. So Alfred Hitchcock's rule is that the size of what you see on screen corresponds to how important it is in the story at that moment. So if you go to a close-up of Ian's shoe here, right? You get a close-up of that. It's probably very important to your story. Otherwise, why would you do it? And I think that makes sense. And a good example of this from Hitchcock's own work is that in Dial M for Murder, there is a shot that where we see this finger dial this phone, and this is the shot that follows it, right? So this is going to repeat here. And so the limitation of the time was they didn't have the technology or lenses to kind of get this shot. So what he ended up doing, because this shot was so important to him, was that they built a big phone that was this big and a big wooden finger so that they could actually get that shot. So, I mean, can you imagine how painstaking that would be to actually have that kind of construction just to get that one moment of a close-up shot? So, what's that?
My goodness.
Yeah. So that's kind of where Hitchcock's rule comes from. But it's really important to think about what you're showing on screen, and the size of it can relate to how important it is as well. All right. So continuing down our something to add?
No.
Okay. Continuing down our shot progression here. Let's watch a clip here of this gentleman, and without giving anything else away, I want you to watch this scene and tell me what your impressions of this gentleman are. So what are your impressions of this guy? What's he all about?
Waiting across the street.
He's waiting across the street. Normal guy, weird guy?
Weird guy.
Weird guy. Why weird?
That's the face he's making.
Okay, the face he's making. But the shot is fairly neutral, right? There's nothing kind of sinister about it. We're close up so you can see his all his glances and whatnot. All right, how about this scene? Ready? What's he thinking here? No?
Kill someone.
He's thinking maybe kill somebody? Could he be a serial murderer? That look to the side definitely helps in that context. All right, should we look at one more? How about that one? So what's the similarity in all three of these scenes I just showed you?
Same.
It's exactly the same beginning and end clip.
Different B-roll.
Different middle shot is what has changed, right? Because we presume when we see somebody close up and looking, the next thing that we see is what they're looking at, right? And so context matters for everything. What that middle piece does changes dramatically the before and after, right? And this is known as the Kuleshov Effect. And so viewers derive more meaning from the interaction of two clips, shown sequentially, than in isolation. And so when we think about patterning our shots in the order of which we reveal things, context becomes key, what you just saw versus what you see next. So it's something to keep in mind as you choose the next shot that you're doing, or go back and watch the last few seconds or minutes of your film and see what kind of story you're telling. And so there's a great explainer for this that I'm going to link to here, but I'm not going to play in class, where Alfred Hitchcock explains this as well. All right, so as we start to build our sequence and pattern our shots, how do we make our edits more natural? There's a few different ways that we can do this, and this is where I said that the heart of editing is using cuts and using dissolves, but there's ways to make them really effective. So one example is to do what's called a smash cut. And this is all kind of where the cut appears. And so typically what we're doing is we're going from very quiet to intense or vice versa, but it kind of hits your viewer in the face and is unexpected. So I'm going to play a clip now and just kind of talk over it as we go. But this is from Inception. Can we get a little more volume out here? I got to turn it up here, sorry.
It's just a dream, then why are you...
All right, so there's this like really dramatic moment. The world is literally exploding around them, and all of a sudden they are ripped back to reality, and it feels very different, right? But it's very sudden and unexpected, and you don't even. I mean, it brings this kind of heightened sense of that transition that you made for dramatic purpose. So that's a smash cut. A match cut, this is when you've got two frames that are framed the same way. Sometimes there's audio that overlaps and helps make this transition. But let's take a look at a transition of a match cut. This is from Breaking Bad. Right, so a very short clip, but how does it help bridge the two scenes for you versus just cutting from him working on the appliance, whatever it was, to her in the office here? Yeah, you're not really taken out of the moment, right? It's not jarring at all. The flow of the camera is the same. So another way to make an effective cut, you can have an audio match altogether. So here's more of our serial killer.
Hey, I just had the weirdest dream ever.
All right, so again, we're kind of bridging these transitions in just like a kind of clever way that keeps your viewer hooked in. So all tools to keep in your tool belt. So really the most effective way to make edits too, when you're working in the context of the same scene and trying to cut between camera angles, is to match on action. And so what this means is like let's look at an example. So we've got a scene here where this woman's going to walk in with a shotgun, and we want to go from a wide shot to a close-up. So let's take a look at what this looks like.
That's right. A little wider on that.
Right, and so you can hear this is a group called Framelines.tv, and they give footage for free that you can practice editing with. But what happens is, so that's the audio that you hear in the background. But what happens is, right, we could cut here as she's walking into her from the other side. So we could cut at any point, but when we cut when she starts to spin, and we match on the next shot in the same action, it hides the edit much more effectively. And this is just called matching on action or cutting on action. And this can be, we'll look at a few examples of this when we do the editing demo, but this can be really crucial to kind of bridging different shots back to back. You can take some of these to the extreme, and we can hide cuts altogether. And so it's when you literally, we'll look at some examples, but you make it so it's seamless to the viewer that there was a transition at all. So this is called the whip pan. This is from Ocean's 11. And it's literally when we hide the cut or the dissolve between a camera whipping between position A and position B. So let's watch this.
Like I said, a machine.
Right, so it's almost like hard to see because the whole frame blurs as we spin the camera. But what this takes on the production side is that you've got your shot, tracking bank manager moving through the gaming floor, right? And then you whip. You just spin the camera very quickly. And in your next shot, you whip the camera of these two guys here, spinning in the same direction, right, trying to match the speed. And then you stop on them, and it's between those two shots that you put in to dissolve and hide the clip. And really makes it very seamless between the two shots. And this has an old history, going back, another Hitchcock reference here, to Rope in 1948 is a film. I'll just play this in the background. But it was really interesting because Hitchcock wanted to make a film that felt like one continuous shot, but the technical limitation of the time was that, and the audio is irrelevant here, so don't worry about that, but the limitation at the time was that they could load a film magazine that lasted only 10 minutes, and so it was a technical limitation that you couldn't tell like an hour and a half film and have it be a continuous shot, because you had to stop and change out the magazine. And so what he did, as you probably saw, was as you move through, we'll just back this up for a second, right? You move the camera up through something that lets you change the shot. You can see the flicker there, and just kind of match the frame as you do it. So you really blend these transitions in. And so it's interesting, if you think about this today, right, this is what this film would look like if you took it into your editor. This is a timeline from Premiere, but literally a bunch of 10-minute scenes that kind of go back to back to back, because that was the limitation of the time. And it's also interesting to think about, because if you think about the kind of choreography and rehearsal that it would take to like nail long takes like that, it's just kind of impressive how this film, came together. All right, so we have L cuts and J cuts. Anybody know which is which, or what they are? Because I put spoilers in the bottom of the slide here. So L cut or J cut is when the audio comes ahead, so if we're on shot A and we're progressing to shot B, and the audio from shot B comes in early as we transition from one scene to another, it just kind of helps bridge the moment for you as a viewer. All right, and on the flip side, if the audio from the first scene extends into the second scene, that's just called an L cut. So you'll hear the term J cut or L cut thrown around by editors. This is simply all it means. But it's a really good way to kind of keep your viewer in the moment and transition from one scene to another. So let's look at a couple of examples for this, and if we can have sound for this, this is more important. So this is from Saving Private Ryan. So if you noticed what we saw as we dollied into the old man who was, I think, at a funeral service or something like that, you started to hear the waves come in from the next scene before we even got there, and it kind of built. And I think on the cut there was a big crash of a wave, but it was much more seamless than just cutting from man sitting in wheelchair to cutting to ocean spraying. So the opposite of that is an L cut. So let's take a look at this from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Here.
Adler.
Here.
Anderson. Anderson.
Here.
Bueller. 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 Bueller.
He's sick. My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night. I guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Simone.
No problem whatsoever.
Fry. Fry. Fry.
Skip over that there. So we kind of get this double meaning where we hear the echoing of the names through the trees as well at the end. So a way to kind of to bridge the gap there too. All right, so editing dialogue is one of the harder things that you'll do as an editor. And there's no really good way to get good at it except for practicing it. So in the scene that we gave you for homework, there's only a few words, so you won't struggle with this too much in this first assignment. But just a few helpful pointers as you start to think about editing dialogue and with two people having a conversation. Often you'll find that you need to take out a word, or you'll need to take out a breath or a pause or something like that. And so, it's easiest to join between words. We've occasionally had to fix things where you have to like take the same word and try to merge it together because somebody misspoke and said a word the wrong way. So one, nail it in production when you do it the first time. And if not, use the consonant sounds to make edits. And the breath is actually really important. So if you are taking out all the breaths, you're going to lose the kind of natural flow and natural rhythm when you are editing. So make sure that they exist where they should, especially if you have to like splice in a line that you decided was important that wasn't recorded originally. All right. So continuity. How many people have seen movies that have bad continuity? Right, do we know what continuity? Yeah, okay, everybody raise their hand. So continuity is obviously a discrepancy when something exists in one shot and not another, or there's a jump in the action. So let's say that your actor, raises his right hand in one shot, you cut to the next one, and the other actor raises their left hand instead. So, again, this all comes down to like paying attention on set and being organized. But it happens to the best of us. Just by way of example, this is a short film that we did last year, and see if you can catch the continuity error here. Anybody see it? What was it? The cup, yep. I spoiled, I shouldn't use the hand example before, but yeah. So, as he puts the cup to his mouth at the end of this montage where we see things very quickly, he's got both hands on the mug. And in the next shot, hands holding the saucer. And like, what are you gonna do? Like, as the filmmaker, I kick myself at this moment every time when I started editing this film. I was like, oh, because you spend so much time like making this beautiful montage and getting your shots just right. And when when you're actually covering the scene, what you're doing is you're starting with probably your master shot or your wide shot, and you're capturing the wide shot of everything that happens. And then you change lenses, and it's later in the day, and you go back for that close-up to get the drinking of the mug. And you forget, and it's important to either have somebody on set to keep track of this for you, or to review, like pull a clip, hit playback on the camera to see what matches. But it's just so easy to overlook things like this. And so, yeah, if you didn't see what happened here, we had the left hand just kind of go from the mug and disappear. But it's kind of heartbreaking. But how do you deal with it? The key is to kind of distract your audience. So we had really fast pacing on most of those shots leading up to that. Some sound design to help distract you, so that hopefully you didn't notice it. I mean, we had a couple of people with sharp eyes certainly grab it, but you do your best to kind of bury it when you notice a mistake like that. All right, so pacing your story is also important. We talked about the kind of emotion behind the story that you're telling, and that'll affect the pacing. I think that is fairly straightforward. And so the longer that you stay on a shot, it tends to also add more weight to it. Or really this comes down to, if you have a conversation between two people, and I'm talking to Ian, like, who do you choose to focus on, right? Is it always the person that's talking, or do you sometimes focus on the person who's not talking? And how do you make this decision? Yeah.
Based on what the content, what the dialogue is.
Sure.
If your reaction to what he's saying is important to the story, then at that time I might decide to cut to your reaction.
Yeah. So kind of to sum this all up, like, whose story is it, right? Is it the story about me? Is it about Ian? Because maybe the story is about me, but while Ian's talking, it's more important to see my reaction. Like you said, you might want to see the reaction shot. So it kind of matters what you choose to see in that moment, whose face you choose to see, and it all comes back to like, who is the story truly about? Right, there we go. Who is the story really about, right? So that's like the most important thing as you kind of develop your script or develop your story. So from beginning to, this is all the stuff that Ian kind of showed or demonstrated earlier, but like, what causes them to make this change? And you are the one who's going to chart the course for them from end to end. So I won't dwell on this because Ian is the one who set this up nicely for us. But know, whose scene is it, right? This is going to inform all of your decisions as you go through it. So music, I think we talked about this earlier, is a really easy way to kind of also impact the emotions of your audience. And the same piece with different music will feel completely different. So definitely play around with different music choices. And before we get to a couple of examples, just a few helpful pieces of advice. Stay organized, review your footage, watch everything before you start editing. And that's like, this will be really helpful, I think, for the first assignment. We've given you, we call it super coverage amongst ourselves, but we've given you a scene where you have a whole bunch of camera angles and different shot sizes for this really simple story that unfolds. And so which one do you choose? And like part of it, since you weren't there on set as the editor necessarily, you need to stop and review everything and take notes on what exists so that you can decide, was there a good moment in this shot versus this shot, or this shot is close up and there's a really good reaction from the actor in it, so I want to focus on that. So take the script, mark it up, and decide on the important moments that you want to highlight. And then take a break, because it'll become easy, just like anything, right, to kind of lose sight of what it is that you're doing. So get up, take a break, come back the next morning. If you've done any software development, I think it's the same way, where you get stuck in the code. You can get stuck in the visuals of it as well and make a bad decision. And just for a few resources, we're going to post these slides online after the lecture, so don't worry about writing all this down, but there's some good resources for some free sound effects and free music. YouTube but recently launched a music library of royalty-free, and also they have public domain content. So there's a bunch of things that you can look at. But in our last 20 or 25 minutes, I wanted to just actually open up Shotcut and look at starting to put some footage together and take a look at that. So are there any questions about putting a story together, storytelling, editing in general that we can answer for you? Yeah.
So before you said about non-linear editors, is there such thing as linear?
Yeah, so linear is like the film version, where you literally, because it's physical film, or if you come from the tape world before we had could import footage into computers, the analog was literally analog, where you had to take a piece of film and splice the next piece on before you could move to the next one. So
I think the best analogy is if you sort of think that you have a 10-minute reel of film and you want to make a change 5 minutes in, you have to spool off 5 minutes of that film to get to that point, right? You have to go all the way down the line to edit in the clip that you want to edit in or take out. Whereas in nonlinear editing, you basically can just randomly jump to any point that you want and access it and remove it and delete it or add new clips in.
Undo.
Right, exactly. So it really does make things 1,000 times faster and much more accessible.
You can do an experiment without having to copy your whole roll of film.
Yeah, and I think the idea is too, duplicating a sequence is much easier. So you edit out a sequence and you're sort of like, I'm happy with this, but I want to try something really experimental. You can duplicate that sequence and go wild on it, and if you don't like it, you still have this copy of your sequence. So it's not the same thing where if you cut up all the film in one way, you have to uncut it and recut it back together in another way. Though there are ways around that. You could make prints, et cetera. So.
But
that's a rabbit hole.
But it comes back to a trade-off, right?
Right.
Then it's a time versus cost trade-off as well. But it's very cheap with nonlinear editor because you simply have it at your fingertips. All right, so just give me a second here. I'm going to flip over, and I'm going to open up Shotcut. All right, and as we come along here, I'm just going to walk you through the real basics of how to use it. You open it up, and it says, do you want to make a new project? And you say yes. So there's a blurb of text here that just says the first piece of footage that you add to Shotcut is going to define what timeline you create. So that is both frame size and frame rate. And so if the footage we give you for this class is probably going to be 720p or 1080p. That's the actual size of the frame at 24 frames per second, which is pretty typical of film. And this says if you start with audio, it's simply going to be 25 frames per second, just the default that they pick for you. So if I'm ready to get started, I can add some files. If I hit the open file button, let's go in here. And let's start with that the match action that I showed.
Let's look at how organized you are first.
Yes, so I follow a pretty typical structure. I have my project file with my, I pre-built something in case I ran out of time tonight, but it looks like we can dive right in. So I have the project file itself. That's just a clip I exported, but in Capture Scratch, I know that anything in Capture Scratch is the folder that contains the contents I want to start with. It's the raw assets that I'm building from. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a couple of clips here. All right, it started playing here. So on the left, we've got kind of, they call it the playlist in Shotcut, but this is kind of like your project panel in Premiere. It's where you kind of keep things organized. I don't believe there's any notion of bins if you've used Premiere before, where you can make a folder to kind of organize things. So you will drop clips in and they will just exist. And you can double click on them and they will show up here in your source monitor. And so I can click and drag along this to kind of look at the clip and the footage. I can double click on the other clip and it pops into the source monitor. But down here in my timeline, I haven't actually done anything yet. So let's start. So what's the first step of 3-point editing? Anybody remember? I gotta choose my endpoint. So let's see. Let's start. If we match what I did before, right, I think I had her walk in from here. So I'm gonna watch forward. And there's some shortcut keys for this, right? So if I hit K, it pauses the frame. If I hit J, it goes in reverse. It plays in reverse. And if I hit L, it goes forward. So J, K, and L, they're right in a row on your keyboard. And I think it's really helpful. And that's pretty common across most editors as well. So I'm going to kind of go forward and back. And I want her to start just out of frame. I don't want to have too much lead up to it. So let's say that this is the moment I want to start. I can hit the I key, set my endpoint. And if you noticed, down here, if I undo or just stretch it back out.
Action.
Oops. Oh boy, it's getting away from here. Back it up. So if I hit I, you're going to watch the little blue indicator jump that shows where the duration of the media that I'm working with is. I'm going to play forward, and she turns, right? So I know that because I want to match the action of her turning, that's where I want to make my next edit. I'm going to just back up. And I can use the arrow keys and go frame by frame. Right, you can hear the audio scrubbing as well. And let's say here, she spins there. I'm going to hit the O key. You can see that that got much shorter. And then you can hit one of these buttons. So like I said, A appends it to the current track, which means it just goes at the end. Or I can hit I think it's the down arrow, and that'll overwrite the clip onto the current track. So I'm just going to press one of those. And then, bam, down here, as I start to play, I have the clip that was just the piece of what I selected. I want to draw attention here to these two words. There's source and project. Some nonlinear editors like Premiere will separate these into two windows for you. But in Shotcut, I don't believe you can. Let me see if we can just drag it out. So you have to choose if you're looking at the source monitor. And that's kind of where think of it as where you're picking from, right? You haven't made any commitments to the media yet. But the project is your timeline. So anything in your project is going to be literally just playing back your timeline. And the software is smart enough that it shows you kind of what you want to see. If you're playing back your playhead from the timeline, it will show you the project window automatically. If you double click on another clip, it'll put it in the source window for you. All right, I think I must have hit a keystroke and lost my shot B, so I'm just going to open that one back up. OK. I've done something to filter it. So let's see, is this the one that we just used? Let's see if we can find a moment to cut to match the action.
Action.
All right, so there's a spin there. So I'm going to arrow forward. She starts to spin. I'm going to hit the I for in point, go forward to the out point. Right, so she spins there and looks down the barrel of the gun. And I'm not sure where I'm going next, right? We could pick the next shot. But I'm ready to kind of put this into the next shot in the sequence. So I'm going to hit the A key, or I think it's the plus key, and that will drop it to the end of my sequence. And there it is. So now we can go back to our timeline and play these back to back.
Now.
So how does this feel? Choppy. Why? It's not in sync, right? We have duplicated action here. I was not very careful when I did this, but this is OK. This is kind of a good way to work. You kind of rough in your edits when you move from the project window or the source window or the preview window, depending on your software. And then you can refine it once you get it down to the timeline. So I'm going to go frame by frame here and watch the spin. And look at this. Like, she literally turns in the same direction a couple times. So I think I like the timing from here. So I'm just going to remove some of the frames. She's got the gun vertically still. Let's try trimming that there. And so I can hit the plus button here to zoom in, and I can grab. You can see that the cursor changes as I do this. It goes to the little grabby arrows. And now, if I click on this media, I can click and drag. And with this magnetic U on, this magnet, it'll snap to either the next piece of media or to the playhead as well. Thank you. And now, so one of the things that is kind of tricky in Shotcut specifically, let's say that I had, I'm just going to make an edit over here. Oops, undo. Let's say that I had a bunch of clips here and I wanted to move them around together. There's no way to select multiple clips, so I do have to pick each one independently and move it around. It's just one of the shortcomings of the software, but certainly not a deal breaker. And then to move this back, I can click or drag and move it back. It'll snap because I've got snapping on. Or I can right-click on this gap here and say remove. And so now, let's watch this transition that we just built. How does that feel? Is it a little tighter? Right, so we can certainly futz with this and kind of go frame by frame until it feels absolutely perfect. But I might do a kind of a rough cut first where I don't worry too much about all the timings of these things, and then go back later for a finer pass. So keep that in mind as you start to work on the homework assignment as well. All right, let's go ahead and start a new project here. Some footage you haven't seen. So Ian, got me thinking. He was talking about flying cars earlier. And so let's look at, let's make a new project. I'm going to put this right on my desktop here. Okay, and I'm going to call this flying cars. All right, and if I don't have to choose automatic. If I know what my footage is, I can pick it, but I think it's easier to let the software do that for me. So I hit set. I'm going to open some files, and let's go into the flying cars demo. Oh no. Oh, here it is. OK. So I've got a bunch of media that I've kind of pre-selected here. I'm just going to, I'm sorry, open file. There we go. So I'm going to just select all of these pieces of media. I believe you can also drag and drop, and I could drag them from here. Whoops. Oh boy, it's my first day with a computer today, huh? All right. Select all these clips, and you can drag them in and drop them, and they'll show up and it starts playing for you. So there's no thumbnail on the audio clips. They're just audio, but I can click and play back and hear it. Right, and then a few different audio selections here. And then I've got some clips I can look through. So I'm just going to start looking around, see what I've got here. And so what should we start with? All right, looks like we have this ship taking off, kind of cruising down the runway, flying over some terrain. I'm just going to click and drag and kind of skim through this clip very quickly. Engineer working on it. More flying. Uh-oh. That doesn't look good. All right, so let's start setting up the story about the hover car kind of taking off, making a trip, and maybe we don't know what's going to happen. It could be dramatic ending. It's the first inaugural flight. So let's start with it on the ground. Let's see, there was a shot with the engineers kind of looking at it, right? Let's find that clip. So with my 3-point editing, I can skim through this clip real quick. All right, and I like that moment. I like the orange jumpsuit here, kind of like the engineer walks away, and that kind of signifies like he's good to go. He could have been giving him a thumbs up there. So I'm going to start here, play it forward. Right, but nothing happens in the end of this clip, so we need to move on to something a little more interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that to my timeline. There it is. And now let's think about what comes next. If we want to start to tease our audience that we're building anticipation of what's going to happen with this flight, maybe we don't know. The shot of people looking out the window could be interesting, right? We got a whole team of people kind of waiting, watching to see what's going to happen. So let's see what happens with these guys. Looks like it's a pretty short clip. I'll go ahead and just put the whole thing in for now. I'm hitting the A key to drop it down into my timeline. And so now, okay, here we go. We've got the engineer walking away. Some people looking in anticipation. All right. Maybe the next thing is having it take off. I think that was this one. There it is. Anything interesting happen at the end of this clip? Kind of heads toward the, so not really. But we know we want to start at the very beginning of this clip, and then we want to get it lifting off the ground. Okay? Again, I'm roughing this in at this point. I'm not worrying about fine tuning. Hit A to append it to the end of my sequence. All right, this is kind of a big dramatic move. Maybe I don't go quite that far that fast. And I'm just clipping around here. You know, if I was doing this on my own for a real project, I would probably sit down, review all these clips, take notes on what the file names were, and note each one. But since, well, here we go. Since we're doing this on the fly, all right, maybe that earlier clip was better, where it comes cruising down the runway. All right, and I like the kind of reveal that happens in this naturally. Looks like there's a film artifact here, but it kind of comes out from behind the tail of the airplane here. So I'm going to keep that moment in. I like that. Kind of reveals that we had success. It comes cruising by. I'm going to set my out point, append it. And let's stop and back up for a second and just watch what we've made so far. We've got our engineer giving the thumbs up. All right, guys looking out the window. Right? So how could I heighten the drama here? Besides music. Right? I'm thinking this shot specifically. So we go from people looking at the window, like maybe we're wondering, is it going to actually get off the ground, right? I let it take off right away. There's not really any waiting. So maybe I put a little bit of a pause there to kind of extend that for a moment. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, I need to move these two clips to do that. I can't move them both. So I need to move them one at a time. And then I can just drag this out at the beginning. Oh, or maybe this is the beginning of the clip. So here's a limitation that I'm hitting. I don't have it. So let me back that up. Put this back. All right, so maybe not the smoothest transition. If I had a little more time, I'd spend some time finessing it, maybe choosing a different shot in between. But we'll say that's good enough for now. And then let's go, we'll get a little bit closer on the pilot here. I like this shot. Kind of shows him mastering control of this. He's flying by some people in the background. Drop that in. And then, I don't know, should we put the explosion in at the end? Just airplane pieces flying. We'll skip it. Okay. So if we want to add some drama to this, like, you know, the whole point of this exercise is actually music assignment and how different pieces of music make it feel differently. Let's take a listen to what we have here. Kind of powerful. Let's drop that in and see how it feels under our clip. So you can do the same thing. You can choose in point, out point, and hit append. And oh yeah. So another annoyance of Shotcut is that right now, because I don't have an audio track, I can't drop it in to the audio track. So it literally drops it into the video track as white video. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say add audio track. Right? Great. And so now down here, I can make this window a little bit bigger by grabbing this handle. I have A1, which is my first audio track. And I can drag and drop this down here. Right? If I need to zoom out, I've got the zoom control. I can come back to the beginning, zoom back in. The plus and minus keys are shortcuts for the zoom control, also common in most editors. And I'm just going to drag this audio up to the beginning. I can see that there's a little gap in between where the audio starts. I'll just trim that up too. I will just trim this up too. So let me show you how to make a split edit or a cut. So I'm going to put the playhead where I want to make the edit. I make sure that I have the right track selected, and I hit the S key, or the razor, kind of looks like a razor blade, but split at playhead. And there we go. Now I can just delete this first part and drag that back. So let's watch this now and see how this feels. A little somber. All right, so maybe we get to this point that pacing doesn't quite match. Maybe it's not quite the right piece of music. Let's see what else we've got. right, let's just go ahead and I'm going to add a new audio track here. I'm going to just mute the first one and drop this one in. It takes me to the end, so I'm just going to back up in time. Make this a little bit bigger. Hopefully you'll have a little more screen real estate when you're working on your projects than I do here on my small screen. All right, so I've got the first track muted now, so we're not going to hear that one at all. Right, and so now what I can do is start to, let's say that this is the piece of music that I like. What I can do is start to kind of line up the critical moments. So at the beginning, let's start in with a thumbs up. Right, that lines up okay. But maybe I'll even take this gap out so that the first time, or linger on the previous shot longer, so that the first time we see these guys, there's this kind of beat of music to kind of add some tension to the whole thing. So I'm actually going to take this other audio clip right out. Move this one up just to keep it easier to see on my screen. And so because I want to extend the first clip, I have to move all these over. Again, this is just an unfortunate thing in Shotcut that you can do in most other editors. All right, and so I'm going to extend this clip, and I have a nice visual representation of the waveform here. Extend this out. Can't quite get where I want to get. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a little split, a cut here, and a cut here. We'll see if this destroys the feeling, and butt this up. Come on. Remember, you can right-click and say remove as well. And so maybe I want to actually cut on the second, what's that instrument, Ian?
It's like a horn section, right? I don't know.
The horn section.
I'm very bad with music when it comes to things.
Let's see, is this going to force me to do a transition, or is this going to work? All right, so I'm going to shorten this clip. I can see where the horn section comes in. Drag this one back. Let's see how we're doing here. Yeah. Okay. So you can kind of see how we're progressing here, and we're almost out of time, but that's okay because we only had one more music sample to kind of take a look at and see the difference. But you can see just how quickly just swapping out. We'll drop the last one in. Why not? We're here. How quickly and easily you can kind of manipulate your audience's emotions and feelings by choosing which shot to start with. Another shortcut for you is hold the Option key and arrow keys. It'll jump between your edits, so you can kind of quickly navigate your timeline. Let's hear this one. That one doesn't really fit. So, but depending on the story you're telling, choosing the right piece of music can have a really big impact. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can use. There's no worries in this course as far as like copyright, where you're going to use everything in the context of this class. So use whatever you like. Most of our demos will probably be from the public domain. But I think that is a kind of a good place to leave it. Do you have any?
Yeah, there was one question that came from online that was sort of asking about how you might think about telling a story that sort of was non-traditional in its beginning, middle, and end. And I think one of the ways that you could think about doing that is maybe you're intercutting between two parallel stories, right? Parallel editing, you have two people converging at a central point, and you're cross-cutting between someone traveling there and another person traveling there. Or you can use flashbacks where we start at a position in time and we flash back to a time previously before that, like in Saving Private Ryan, right? It's the old man in the cemetery and we flash back. And the actual story is about something that happened long before, and maybe that has sort of a linear component to it. So there are a variety of different ways that you can approach storytelling in less this sort of, there's the beginning, the middle, and the end. You can sort of begin to get creative and rearrange them as you go through. So just something to add into there.
Great.
But any other questions?
All right, well, we hope you have fun diving into the first homework assignment. We're going to be recording after this lecture a little walkthrough on how to get started, so that'll be posted either tonight or tomorrow morning. But email us with any questions, And we'll see you in Zoom next week.